It's a good time to get rid of your microSD card. At least that's my takeaway after testing over 20 different NVMe SSD hats for the Pi 5. Sure, there are going to be uses for microSD still, but after recording 4K video on this Pi 24/7 with Frigate over PoE, or testing this tiny 8-watt 4-drive NAS, there's no going back. M.2 NVMe SSDs aren't much more expensive per terabyte, but they're way faster and more reliable. You can get them in sizes ranging from these cute little 2230 drives up to 2280, or even bigger for more exotic use cases. Raspberry Pi is launching their own M.2 HAT today, but what's crazy is there are already dozens of other alternatives that might be better. But to get it out of the way, I'll run through Raspberry Pi's official HAT really quick. The Pi NVMe HAT costs $12 and works great for up to 800 megabytes per second, provided you have a good enough SSD. It fits in the official Pi case, but the case fan won't fit, and you have to use it with an active cooler. The included thumb screw is a little awkward, but works fine with either 2230 or 2242 drives. It might end up working with a Power over Ethernet HAT, but I have no idea. I don't know when that's going to ship. It has a little FFC or flat flexible connector that follows the HAT Plus standard. Having the connections on opposite sides of the cable makes it impossible to plug it in the wrong way. Some other hats I've used have the connections on the same side, and that could lead to shorting things out if you're not careful. But it's still a finicky plug, and if you want to stack hats, you need to use a GPIO standoff like the one they include. So is this thing worth $12? Yeah, but that leads me to the question, with so many other hats to choose from, what makes the Raspberry Pi M.2 HAT so special? Well, nothing, really. I mean, it's first-party hardware, it'll have the best support in class, and you'll be able to pick one up just about anywhere. But in this case, there are some pretty cool alternatives. Like, take Pineboard's HAT Drive Dual or Pimoroni's NVMe base dual. Both of these guys add 2 M.2 slots, so you could run your SSDs in RAID for redundancy. Pineboards even makes a nifty hat that tacks on an extra Ethernet jack, so you could turn your Pi into a tiny travel router with storage for Kodi or LibreELEC. But before we go any further, how? How can we ditch these pesky microSD cards? And how can I segue to our sponsor? No, there's no sponsor. But I will mention that many of the hats that you see in this video are review samples companies sent me. No money exchange hands, but I like to be transparent about where things come from in my videos. The easiest way to get started with Raspberry Pi was always a noob's card. You just buy this and plug it in and boom, Pi OS boots up and you're done. The alternative was to buy a microSD card, plug it into a card reader, and use another computer to flash Raspberry Pi OS to it. Then plug it into the Pi and bingo, Pi OS. With NVMe drives, there are still a few options that'll work right out of the box, like Cytron makes these MakerDisk drives. These all have Pi OS flashed to them, and if I pop one on the M.2 HAT, it just boots right up. No need for flashing. But for generic drives, besides flashing them from another computer with a USB adapter like I did here, Raspberry Pi has network install. For more on that, go check out Explaining Computers video. He covers everything much better than I could here. There are even other ways to flash SSDs too, like I maintain a fork of the popular RPi clone software. If you have Pi OS installed on a microSD card, you can run RPi clone to migrate to an NVMe drive. After you're done, unplug the microSD card and reboot, and that's it. But I still haven't gotten to the ultimate question. Why choose NVMe? What's so special about it? Well, sometimes good things come in small packages, but that's not the case with microSD. These things are so tiny they can't really cram in the performance or reliability of a bigger NVMe drive. They're convenient, and their small size and power requirements make them a great option if you don't need much performance. But there's less I/O, smaller volume for storage, and you can rule out any kind of fast caching like the DRAM cache that makes these bigger drives faster. NVMe is also faster because it's directly connected to the Pi's fast PCI Express bus. It also uses larger flash storage chips that are almost always more reliable, especially if you compare it to no-name $5 microSD cards that some people use. And good quality NVMe drives include important specs for reliability, like the Pine drive has a 1.5 million hour MTBF rating and 150 terabytes TBW. You can buy more expensive drives with even better ratings too. Only industrial microSD cards even list those kind of specs, and they're important if you want to run a Pi for anything more critical than like a game console. And even then, backups are still important because no storage is perfect. But I guarantee with a good SSD and a good power supply, you won't run into the weird flaky issues or failures like you would with a cheap microSD card or a phone power adapter. And NVMe is way faster too. Like looking at PiBenchmarks.com, the scores for NVMe drives are way higher than even the fastest microSD cards, like more than 10 times faster. A lot of that has to do with IOPS too, or input-output operations per second. MicroSD cards are usually optimized for drones, phones, or cameras, and they aren't made to handle the random access a computer like a Pi needs. NVMe SSDs are usually 10 to 100 times faster at that. To get the fastest performance on the Pi 5, you can upgrade the PCI Express bus speed from Gen 2 to Gen 3. And doing that with almost any NVMe SSD, I can get almost 900 megabytes per second max read and write speeds. And NVMe is better even than USB. Even the best USB adapters, like the ones I flew on a Pigeon last year, are limited by the USB to SATA or USB to NVMe chipsets they use. Even with all that, NVMe isn't all magic and butterflies. Some NVMe drives are flaky at Gen 3 speeds, and some just won't work at all. A lot of Western digital drives are like that for some reason. Pineboards actually did a bunch of testing and found out sometimes even the same model drive will have different firmware on the little controller chip, and some versions flake out. I've had issues with this tiny SN520 before, and also an old Transcend drive, but some of the Transcend and WD drives I've used worked fine. Plus, just because it's an NVMe doesn't mean it's amazing. There are a few generic vendors out there putting out pretty shoddy storage. So buy a name brand, and even better, see what other people are using. I post my test data to my Pi PCI Express database, but there are other people doing a lot of great testing too. Only 2 companies so far seem to be targeting Pis specifically, Citron and Pineboards. They guarantee their SSDs will work, and so far in my testing, I've never had an issue with either one of these. What I have had issues with though is these multi-drive hats. These hats are convenient if you want to use RAID for redundancy or have multiple disks. But there are 2 problems. The first one is the speed of the PCI Express bus. All the multi-drive boards I've tested so far use the ASMedia ASM1182E chip. This is a PCIe Gen 2 chip that splits one PCIe Gen 2 lane into 2. The problem is you can't get any faster speeds out of it. Instead of one drive at Gen 3 getting like 800 megabytes per second, you're stuck with multiple drives at Gen 2 sharing 450 megabytes per second. That's still useful for some people, but if you subscribe to the idea that more is better, that's a pretty raw deal. It's especially bad on a board like this, the 4-drive NVMe board from Geekworm. I did a whole video on it over on Level 2 Jeff, and it's really gimped by that Gen 2 switch. A couple vendors are working on Gen 3 support, and that'll be exciting, but we'll have to wait and see how much those cost. Hopefully not too much more. The speed isn't always a deal breaker though. What maybe is the fact that right now at least, booting an NVMe SSD on one of these multi-drive boards, well, it's a little interesting. Go check out this GitHub issue for more, but I've been working with the Pi firmware team to try to get things stable, and it seems like there's still a few bugs. It does work, kinda, but I'm not recommending booting your Pi off one of these multi-drive boards just yet. I have a ton of these boards now. I haven't tested every single one, but I noticed a few trends. Like some of the really cheap ones use these white cables that can be flaky. Try to avoid them and use the orangish ones instead. These have impedance match traces that are better for the high-speed signaling. Also, some boards seem to be laid out a little better than others, and bottom boards like this Pimoroni NVMe base won't fit in any normal Pi case, but you can use one as a solid base plate to build on top of, like this build I did for the little network video recorder I use at home. I've been testing all these boards, and as always, I keep posting my results to my open source Pi PCI Express database, so go check that out for more. So, NVMe. It's a thing now. It was possible on the Compute Module 4, but to be honest, the regular old Pi 4 and Pi 5 are the more popular options. The more interesting question I have is whether Raspberry Pi is going to add an NVMe slot on the Pi 400 in the future, or Pi 500 or whatever they'll call the thing. The Pi 400 was pretty cool, but it's still a little slow. With Pi 5 speeds and an NVMe drive, that'd be a worthy desktop replacement. Until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling.